warm welcome to you all. This is a special PECs meeting. It's come and see, and I welcome especially not just the old members of PECs, of the Parish Evangelization Cells, but also potential members. And I hope that you may respond by joining one of our vibrant cells. So, as a theme for this session, special session, is Parish and Cell as portraits of the early church. My aim behind this teaching is to help you to see a resemblance between the early church on one hand and the parish and the cell. What's the common ingredients or constituents of these three entities: parish, cell, and early church? And I'm going to quote one single line from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verse 42. I quote, "And they were devoting themselves to the teaching of the apostles and the fellowship and the breaking of the bread and the prayers." Now, let me qualify the word they. They, presumably, are those 3,000 new converts on Pentecost in the wake of Peter's sermon, as a response to Peter's sermon. So we have got here a fledgling Christian community, the community in Jerusalem. So in this quotation from the Acts of the Apostles, we have got the hallmarks of the early Christian community in Jerusalem. Now, let me unpack these four hallmarks, constituents of the early church, and not only of the early church, of the cell, and of every parish. The teaching of the apostles. What do we mean by this phrase? First and foremost, we need to make a distinction between the teaching of the apostles, the proclamation, which means the kerygma. What do I mean by the word kerygma? I mean the announcement of the good news of Jesus' death and resurrection. That's the kerygma. And also the word catechesis. The word catechesis is ongoing formation, deeper teaching and learning. So these three are different: teaching of the apostles, proclamation, and catechesis. So what was the teaching of the apostles? It's quite interesting. It's quite surprising that in Luke's Gospel we find a clear description of the content of Jesus' teaching, but in Acts we do not find a clear description, and this is the surprising bit, of the content of the apostles' teaching. So what was the apostles' teaching? I believe, and biblical scholars of course tell us, that the teaching of the apostles was the continuity of Jesus' teaching. What he taught, they orally were transmitting it to the early converts. That's what it means by teaching of the apostles. We must bear firmly in mind that the early Christians didn't have the New Testament. They had only the Old Testament. So the teaching of the apostle, the oral tradition, then passed into the writings of the New Testament. So what we find in the New Testament was already in circulation orally. So the teaching of the apostles in the New Testament is the written teaching of the apostles. Now, that's the phrase, the teaching of the apostles. But what do we mean? The second constituent, the second hallmark, fellowship. The word fellowship, we use it, but we've got to be very careful what we mean by fellowship. Fellowship doesn't mean social life. We'll have tea and coffee after Mass or refreshments. Fellowship means common life, sharing of life, communion. And this fellowship in the early church, but also in the cell and in the parish, is practically expressed where? In the breaking of the bread and the prayers. So that's the second constituent. The third constituent is the breaking of the bread. Let us unpack this. The breaking of the bread does not only refer to the agape, which means the love feast, the fellowship meal, but it's a formal expression, and it's a technical phrase for the Eucharist. And this, we come across it both in Luke's Gospel, the first volume, but also in the Acts, the second volume. Let us go now to the fourth constituent, the prayers. Now, these prayers, I believe, this phrase echoes. Don't forget that the early Christians were Jewish. So they continued attending the Jerusalem temple. And when we say prayers, we are referring to the set times of the Jerusalem temple. But not only those times, but even when they met in their houses to pray together. So these are the four hallmarks, constituents of the early church, and therefore, and eventually, of every parish and cell. Now, you might say, but in a cell, we haven't got the breaking of the bread. We haven't got the Eucharist. We have got, nevertheless, worship. And this worship prepares us and enthuses us to receive the Holy Communion. Now, my question is this for you to discuss. The early church sets a timeless and vivid benchmark for the backbone of a spirit-filled parish and cell. And how can we say that our parish of Holy Innocents is spirit-filled, or a cell is spirit-filled, spirit-led? Four. These are the four signs of a spirit-filled cell and parish. 1, learning. 2, loving. 3, worshipping. And 4, prayers. They form the heartbeat. They form the heartbeat of the early church, and equally they form the heartbeat of a cell and a parish. When we compare our parish and the cell with the early church, what do we see? This is the question. Do we see these inseparable hallmarks of the early church? We cannot say, oh, out of these four, we have got three. No, the four go together. They are essential constituents. So you cannot separate them. And they are absolutely united. If you and if we separate them, we damage the portraits of both parish and cell. Because both parish and cells are grounded in truth, the apostles' teaching, united in love, fellowship, centered on Christ's sacrifice. What is it? The Eucharist, the breaking of the bread, and equally important, empowered by prayer, the prayers. So this is what I wanted to put across, that a parish, a cell, and the early church, the three of them share the same constituent parts, namely, I repeat, the teaching of the apostles, 2, the fellowship, 3, the breaking of the bread, and the prayers. I hope you enjoy this special session of the cell, and thank you for listening, and thank you for coming. God bless.